NHL by the Era, NHL Expansion and WHA. In this episode of NHL by the Era, I'll be talking about NHL Expansion, WHA competition, and the WHA merger. This period of hockey was known as the period of expansion because the league went from 6 teams to 21 teams until the 1991 season. In 1967, it was decided to expand the league by 6 teams, doubling the size of the NHL. The Los Angeles Kings, Minnesota North Stars, Philadelphia Flyers, Pittsburgh Penguins, California Golden Seals, and St. Louis Blues entered the NHL. 3 years later, before the 1970-71 season, the NHL awarded franchises to Vancouver and Buffalo. The teams were named the Canucks and Sabres, respectively. For the 1970-71 season, both Buffalo and Vancouver made their debuts and were put into the East Division, while Chicago was moved to the West Division. The 1970s were associated with aggressive and often violent play. Known as the Broad Street Bullies, the Philadelphia Flyers are the most famous example of this mindset. Philadelphia Flyers captured the 1974 Stanley Cup, becoming the first expansion team to win the league's championship, then won the Stanley Cup again in 1975 to win back-to-back cups. In 1972, the NHL faced competition from the newly formed WHA, as the league lured many players away from the NHL. The WHA's biggest signing was luring Bobby Hull from the Blackhawks to play for the Winnipeg Jets. He signed a long-term contract for $2.75 million and lent instant credibility to the new league. After Bobby Hull signed, several other players quickly followed suit, and the NHL suddenly found itself in a bidding war for talent. By the time the 1972-73 WHA season began, 67 players had switched from the NHL to the WHA. Initially, the league had no intention to expand past 14 teams, but the threat the WHA represented caused the league to change its plan. The New York Islanders and Atlanta Flames were announced as 1972 expansion teams. 2 years later, the Kansas City Scouts and Washington Capitals were added for the 1974-75 season, expanding the NHL to 18 teams. By 1976, both the NHL and WHA were dealing with serious financial problems, and a talk of a merger was growing, while franchise relocations in the NHL were approved. The Kansas City Scouts moved to Denver after just 2 years in Kansas City to become the Colorado Rockies, while the California Golden Seals moved to Cleveland to become the Cleveland Barons. 2 years later, the Barons merged with the Minnesota North Stars, reducing the NHL to 17 teams for the 1978-79 season. In 1977, John Ziegler succeeded Clarence Campbell as NHL president, and a move towards a merger picked up. The WHA folded in 1979. As a result, the Edmonton Oilers, Hartford Whalers, Quebec Nordiques, and Winnipeg Jets joined the NHL as expansion teams, bringing the league up to 21 teams. The 1979-80 season marked the last season for the Atlanta Flames. The franchise was sold for $16 million and relocated to Calgary, becoming the Calgary Flames for the 1980-81 season. 2 years later, the Rockies were sold for $30 million and left Denver to become the New Jersey Devils for the 1982-83 season. Here are some of the superstars during this 20-year period. Bobby Orr was the greatest player during this era. He revolutionized defensemen's impact on the offensive part of the game, as blue liners after him were judged on how well they created goals. In the 1968-69 season, Bobby Orr scored 21 goals to set an NHL record for goals by a defenseman, en route to winning his first of 8 consecutive Norris trophies as the league's top defenseman. Orr won the Art Ross Trophy as the NHL's leading scorer twice, the only defenseman in NHL history to do so, along with the Hart Trophy twice. Despite having to retire prematurely after only 12 NHL seasons, he finished with 270 goals, 915 points in 657 games. Phil Esposito, who was Orr's teammate in Boston, became the first player in league history to score 100 points in a season, finishing with 126 points. Esposito would go on to score 100-plus points 5 different times. Esposito was the first player to score 50 goals in a season, 5 times in a row, including a then-record 76 goals in the 1970-71 season, to go along with a then-record 152 points the same year. He won the Art Ross Trophy as the leading point scorer 5 times, led the league in goal scoring 6 times, and won the Hart Trophy 2 times. Bobby Clarke was the perfect representation of the Broad Street Bullies, and is the best player in their franchise history. Bobby Clarke captained the Philadelphia Flyers from 1973 to 1979, and led them to back-to-back Stanley Cups in 1974 and 1975. He ranks first in points with 852, points with 1,210, plus minus plus 506, shorthanded goals 32, games played 1,144, and is fourth all-time in goals with 358, all-time in Flyers history. In the playoffs, he ranks first all-time in assists, 77, points, 119, and games played, 136. The second best defenseman in the 1970s was Larry Robinson, whose two-way prowess played a key part in the 5 Stanley Cup championships the Montreal Canadiens won in the 1970s. He won the Norris Trophy twice and the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the 1978 playoffs. He holds an impressive career plus-minus rating of plus 730, including an overwhelming plus 120 in the 1976-77 season. Although this period of expansion hurt the league, a guy named Gretzky came along and brought the game to new heights.